Our panel for today on Alice Childress. Now, Alice Childress is a hero to many, but is also a hero to every entertainment lawyer that deals with authorship. And that's how I came to know Alice Childress, was through my own legal studies. And just to know that here's a playwright who stood up and fought for her rights and stood up for what was right for her, and really helped establish some of the fundamental standards of co-authorship, which is I love to talk about, but we won't talk about that tonight. We can talk about the other side, but she really is a hero. I mean, someone that takes that on just shows you the kind of character. It's not easy for a playwright, as many of you will know, to go and go into the court system and fight for your rights. So I really admire that. Just to that's my little intro. But I'm going to introduce our moderator for tonight. It is Donetta Lavinia Grays. She's a playwright. She's an actress. Her plays include Last Night and the Night Before, Warriors Don't Cry, Laid to Rest, The Review, or How to Eat Your Opposition, and Where We Stand, which nominated for the award. I'm going to say, can I say you won anyway?
Sure.
I'm just giving it to you. Drama League and a Broadway Black Award nominee. She's the recipient of the Whiting Award for Drama, the Helen Merrill Playwright Award, the National Theater Conferences Stavis Playwright Award, a Lilly Award, which is great. It's a Dramatist Guild related award, Tom McKerney National Playwriting Award, and the Doric Wilson Independent Playwrights Award. She has also staffed for television on Spectrum's Manhunt, FX's Y, The Last Man, and served as the executive story editor on Joe versus Carol for Peacock, and is currently the co-producer on Seconds for AMC. Not too bad, but yet also an actress with Broadway acting credits, which include The Skin of Our Teeth, In the Next Room, or The Vibrator play, and Well. She has a long list of off-Broadway film, television credits to boot, but is also extraordinarily knowledgeable when it comes to the world of Alice's Childress's plays. So I'm really grateful, Donetta, that you could be here this evening and lead us in this great conversation. So with that, I will turn my video off and pass the baton.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction. Yeah, I am absolutely thrilled and honored to be moderating this conversation. Alice Childress means so much to me, coming from South Carolina and studying at the College of Charleston and learning about Alice Childress. She made such a huge impact on my life as a writer and an actor. And I'm excited to talk to two women who are so closely bound to her work and keeping her legacy alive. So I would love to introduce Suzanne Scott Woodard and Sarah Douglas. Let me read a little bit of their bios for you. Miss Suzanne Scott Woodard was born, raised, and educated in New York City. She graduated from Empire State College and went on to earn 2 master's degrees from Bank Street College. Suzanne became a New York middle school teacher and later a literacy coach, might need one now, for teachers in District 5. During her teaching career, Suzanne taught at the Choir Academy of Harlem, home of the School of the Boys Choir of Harlem, and the Thurgood Marshall Academy for Learning and Social Change. Through these experiences, Suzanne's skills were enhanced by professional development experiences at MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And during this period, Suzanne also served as the choir director and pianist for the children's choir at the Obsidian Baptist Church for 20 years. It is here that she met and married the Reverend Dino Woodard, assisted to the pastor, Reverend Dr. Calvin O. Butts III. Through Reverend Woodard, Suzanne met his brother, Nathan Woodard, and his wife, author, playwright Alice Childress. Getting to know Alice Childress was both a privilege and a pleasure. Already familiar with Alice's book, A Hero Ain't Nothing But a Sandwich, the world of Alice's plays and books and her celebrity came to light during this time. Alice was also kind enough to offer guidance to Suzanne when she was writing her thesis, a beginning chapter for a novel. And after Alice's passing, her husband Nathan and husband Dino, Susan met Sarah Douglas, literary agent for Alice's work, and together they began working together to ensure that Alice's plays would continue to be presented to the world, true to Alice Childress's purpose. Suzanne Scott Woodard is mother of 2 sons, 2 daughters, and 8 grandchildren and 6 great-grandchildren. God bless you. I mean, all right. Sarah L. Douglas established her independent agency, SLD Associates, in 2019, building on her 35 years of experience and well-earned reputation for advocating and spearheading and shepherding the careers and artistry of theater artists. She began her career with literary agent Helen Harvey, one-time head of William Morris's Legit department, and to her good fortune, her mother. Her background includes a brief stint with I always pronounce this wrong. Jimican Theater. Jujamson, thank you. Jujamson Theaters, followed by a 20-year association with legendary agent Flora Roberts. Ms. Douglas assumed ownership and administration of Flora Roberts, Inc. following Ms. Roberts' death, representing iconic plays such as The Diary of Anne Frank, The Gin Game, and works by Alice Childress, Ionescu, Dorothy Parker, Jean Aloeb, and Christopher Fry. She is proud to have fulfilled Harry Abrams' wish to expand the theatrical literary department of Abrams Arts Agency, where she had the privilege of working with many of the theater's most talented designers, composers, playwrights, artists, and agents for 15 years. Currently, her clients include Mary Yetson, Richard Maltley Jr., David Shire, Jennifer Tipton, Iris Dart, Mart Stoller, Joyce Carol Oates, Irene Mechie, Daniel Met, Sean Hartley, and Ashley Tata. My goodness. It is a pleasure to talk to you both today. Thank you so much for being here. So the first thing that I want to ask, and it was laid out pretty clearly there in the bio, but I want to know your history with Alice Childress's work itself, how you were introduced to it, and what is your history with her as a person? So, Suzanne, you knew her, yeah?
Yes, I did. As stated in my bio, I met her when I began dating my husband, Dino Woodard. And, he came from not a real large family, but there were 5 of them. And then his brother married Alice. And so we would go to their house and we'd have dinner. And there was another couple. And she liked to entertain and she liked to talk. And because I was a new person in her group, I don't think ever with them where there were a lot of people, but an intimate group. She wanted to know who I was. Mm-hmm. And I got this sense that it was almost like being interviewed. Over the years, I've become to understand her point of view even more, that she looks at each person individually. And so she's curious as to who you are, what you're about, what she can discuss with you. Might you fit into her activist agenda, if you will, because she was very community minded. And she wanted to see who you were. And so she dug, very politely. She had a lot to say, and she wanted to get that back from you. She was very friendly, very engaging. And, when you see someone's picture on a book cover or whatever, and you get this picture in your mind of what they're like. And then when you meet them, they're nothing like how you picture them. She was a short-statured lady. And when I met her, she did not look like the pictures on her book covers, She was older and she had this mixed gray, almost white hair, and it was, very scholarly looking. and just very busy and very intellectually astute. And if she found out, like she did with me, that I was going to graduate school, I was trying to write this chapter, she offered some pointers, gave me some material. That's what she was about. She was always building, just like in her plays, building character, opening things up to see where you were. And her contributions helping me and other people helped me to write this first chapter, not just from a literary point of view, but what I was trying to say. So, and I'm not sure I can give a definition to that, but she was an extraordinary person, not just intellectually gifted. I could say she was brilliant, when she was, but on so many levels. But she had this way of seeing inside of people and then bringing that out. And before I knew it, she was gone. She got sick and she died rather suddenly. So I wish that I had known her better, but I got a lot from her. And then being involved with Sarah and her works and going to plays and so on, I continued to understand her for the short time that I did interact with her.
Awesome. Sarah, how did you come to meet and know Alice's work?
Well, I did know Alice as well. In when I worked for Flora Roberts, Flora was her first agent, and I was cutting my eye teeth as an agent, so I was more support to Miss Roberts, who was certainly leading the advocacy and promotion for Alice, with a couple of productions that were not to have such smooth, popular lives. And then, of course, when Alice wrote the Moms Mabley play, and that became, the things that happened with that play happened. I was there for all of that in the background, watching what was going on. And I say Alice came out of an activist environment, and my family and Flora Roberts, in fact, also came from an activist background. So I think, one of the things is that Alice was there in social justice circles with Sidney Poitier, with Harry Belafonte, with Ozzie and Ruby Davis. And in fact, her first play, she was originally an actress, but her first play was written on a dare from Sidney Poitier. So, and she exuded class, presence. It's funny that Suzanne talks about her stature, because if you didn't have anything to give you perspective on it, you would think she was 6 feet tall. I mean, she just carried herself with such power and such expression. And she was always kind and always clear and a really good communicator. And I think that is also reflected in her work, quite frankly. But
yeah,
we'll get to that, I guess. Thank you.
Yeah, when I think about her work, she feels that tall to me. So it feels like she would take up space in a way. I'm curious, did she talk a lot about her legacy when she was living? Did she talk about what she wanted to leave and how she wanted that to be maintained in her passing, after her passing?
Not to me. Not to me.
Not to me either.
Oh.
I don't know if she had those kinds of conversations with her husband. I mean, on some level, she must have told him what she wanted done with her writings. I mean, the original scripts are at the Schomburg. So there must have been some practical conversations, but long-term, engaging with Sarah, although no, but you two are already engaged. But I mean, what she would like to see happen, I don't know if she had those conversations with Nathan, because my husband was very, kind of kept things close.
Mhm.
So he didn't tell me much either, so
But remember, Alice was an activist.
Mhm.
So she didn't just talk the talk, she walked the walk.
Absolutely.
And I think that there's a lot to be garnered from how she lived her life.
Mhm.
And again, I think it's echoed and reflected in her plays.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. So can you talk a little bit about how the two of you met and what the conversation, how the conversation around the work began in regards to maintaining that legacy in the work for her? What was your meeting like?
Suzanne, should I go first or should you?
Why don't you go first? Because you reached out to me.
Yes. So Alice passed away. Her husband, Nathan Woodard, was her beneficiary, her spoke for her, controlled the work. And then when he passed away, it was the Reverend Woodard, who was very business, very cut and dry about things, but asked a question, he would respond very, he clearly was a man who was very busy, and we worked very, there wasn't a lot going on, let me say, but his interest and his connection was there. And at that time, around the time that the Reverend was the estate, in effect, Charles Randolph Wright came to me about Trouble in Mind, which was a play that I was not familiar with. I was only familiar with the title. And Charles Randolph Wright gave me a lesson, and I read the play, and I was completely swept away by the play and the history of the play. And we set about trying to find a way to put it on Broadway. That was a mission that we both knew that Alice would be completely in support of. And the Reverend was completely on board for that. And as a matter of fact, we had a reading at one point that the Roundabout Theater held at the American Airlines Theater. Suzanne was there with the Reverend. And it was a wonderful reading. It was a great way to get that life into the play that you don't get when you just read it. And we're working, and the Reverend passed away, and different things were happening with regard to productions. So there were always little things happening with other titles. There wasn't anything that really needed artistic or creative approvals. So I do sort of see there's a somewhat of a dividing line between the artistic and creative decisions and the business decisions. And I've always been clear about my job is the business, and the author/author's family is in charge of the creative and artistic decisions. So as there became a promise of a Broadway production, I knew that I wanted and needed, in fact, the family to be involved, because there would be creative approvals of director, cast, et cetera, and that's an appropriate area for the family. And the Reverend had passed, and I reached out to Suzanne and I said, there are things that are coming up. Please get your house in order. And she did. And the pandemic happened. And about a week after George Floyd, I was fit to be tied, as my mother would say. And I called up Todd Hames, who had always been interested in the play, and Charles Randolph Wright, the Broadway director, had an artistic relationship with Roundabout. But I spoke to Todd and I said, you've always been a supporter of this play. I am going to get this play produced in the first season the theater's open again. And I understand if you can't or unable to do it, but if you can't, I'm giving you a chance because you've been a supporter. I'm going to get a producer. And something that never happened to me before in my many decades. He said, no, Sarah, I want to produce that play, and I will produce it in my first season open after the pandemic. Would you like me to send you a contract? Which, you ask an agent, right? I was like, yes, okay, send me a contract. But 3 days later, I had a contract.
Wow.
2 weeks later, we had it signed. This never
Wow.
happens.
Wow.
And they were off working on production, getting everything scheduled.
Mm.
So that was unfortunately, the play was so far ahead of its time that we needed George Floyd to be the impetus for that focus and interest. So
Yeah, it was controversial in the writing itself, even in its time. It was didn't it, there's a reason why it took so long for it to come to Broadway.
you know
Right?
it.
Yeah. So so let's talk about those decisions that you wanted the family to focus in on, right? There's the business
Oh, we have
part
a
you
great
said.
example.
Yeah.
So we have a really key and essential example.
Mhm.
And it involves Kathy Perkins, who I would like to give some credit to.
Absolutely.
Kathy Perkins, who is I consider her a preeminent scholar on Alice Childress's work. And she knew Alice, and she was meeting with Alice, and she was responsible for pulling together a collection of Alice's work that's published. And there is a version of Trouble in Mind in this publication.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're preparing for production. We have a production script that they're taking out of the PDFs that are copied out of the book. And before going into rehearsal, we are aware of the fact that there's a discrepancy in the script. And it was a crucial discrepancy, because if you're familiar with the play, you know, there is a point in the second act where, why am I forgetting the lead character's name?
Okay.
I'll get there. It's because it's my age, obviously. But the lead character is fed up. She's fed up with being, you know, put in those stereotype roles. She's fed up with being pushed into the corner where her opinion means nothing. And she has a moment where she really it's a come to Jesus moment for everybody. She tells everybody what's going on. Right. That was in one version of the script. And then there was another version where it was completely played down and softened.
Oh, not the version we wanted, is it?
Well, now here's the question.
Okay.
The version, and this was where Suzanne and I spoke. We compared the versions. And then we went to Kathy Perkins. The softened down version was in Kathy's publication.
Oh, all right.
Which would be the most recent point of reference.
I see.
And I talked with Charles Randolph Wright about it, and we thought, well, we want to honor Alice's intention. Even though I think we all knew in our gut what was the more dramatic telling. And Kathy Perkins, God bless her, said, oh, and looked at the script in her publication and said, there is an error.
Wow.
That is the wrong version. Wow. So with the collective viewpoint of the family, of which to me is the core of what we needed to do, with the educational academic viewpoint, and with the theatrical creative director's perspective, we moved very confidently into the version that is now the definitive version.
Sure. And I think about the pivotal moments in Wedding Band and Wine in the Wilderness, where there is that moment where the lead actress goes in. And so it would be to me sort of, oh, that's curious that moment would have been softened given the work across the board. But what is the conversation inside the family when that happens, Suzanne? When there is where do you start with that kind of conversation?
Well, you start with the two versions, Alice's original and then the softer version. And then there's this discussion about Alice's intent. What was it that she was trying to say? What did she want the audience to get from this? And how does presenting this softer version change what the audience perceives, not just what they hear and see, but what do they learn from the play in that particular segment? And so I read both parts with Sarah, and we emailed back and forth and discussed it. And it seemed clear that Alice's original point of view was the lesson that she wanted to teach her audience, because writers, and you know this yourself, writers are teachers.
Mm-hmm.
Your audience is broader than a classroom, but you have a reason for what you are saying. You want people to get something to learn a lesson, and you want them to take that with them and have it inform what happens in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So, between those conversations that Sarah and I had, we decided it would be better to present Alice's original.
Confidently, I think,
that
we really
came to that herself, which was fortunate. I'd like to, if you're finished with that strain, it was just,
Sure.
I want to go back to something Sarah said.
Mm-hmm.
Or she was discussing how our relationship evolved, basically.
Yes.
That after my husband died, and then she reached out to me because there was a need from the family to get involved because certain decisions had to be made. Also, on the business side of things, my husband, signed checks and, took care of banking and that kind of thing. And there was no one left to do that. He did not have a will either. And then the lawyer he was working with passed away also. So this, it presented kind of a crazy situation. So I was able to step in and fulfill that part too. And that led to the settling of the estate and, in my role as it is now.
Yeah.
But it does speak to, I think, why these seminars are so important, because, if there were not a Broadway production of
Mhm.
any of Alice's work, but if Trouble in Mind, a Broadway production, had not come along, there could have been just little things percolating over time that wouldn't necessarily need judgment calls or artistic, weighing in on artistic issues, right? But certainly a first-class contract,
Mhm.
certain dispositions of rights fall outside of the customary, if you will, powers and abilities of an agent.
Mm.
So that production could not have happened if the family were not legally in the position
Right.
to dispose of those rights.
So then, what do you think would have? Okay, I'll phrase it this way: knowing what you know now, what conversations might you have had earlier in regards to Alice Childress' legacy and her work? Like, how would there have been a different way to prepare, even outside of conversations that she might have had when she was living? I know that I'll personally, like, I'm thinking about this now. I haven't probably finished all the work that I will have written, hopefully, that there's more ways to go. But what do you wish had been a preparation for the family, or what knowledge do you wish you had before? Either one of you. It's a big question, but
Yes, it is. I wish that Alice, and I have to say Nathan, because they were partners in all of this while they were both alive, could have foreseen that there would be a need for legal representation, not just as long as they could control it, because once they passed away, it was like that was it, you know. You know, if and it's a hard thing to look at for your own life, but you know that one day you're not going to be here. You need to know what's going to happen to the work, who's going to ensure that if there's an interest in it, that it can go forward. Because while the writer is alive, they're aware of all of the legal, the social, the financial aspects of getting your work published, getting it to the public, what all of that entails. So just a little more recognition that we have to do something. We have to have a lawyer. And maybe Alice thought that the lawyer that they had would just be able to fill in those gaps and reach out to someone in the family, because he knew the family was kind of a small circle of people, and make things happen. But it's the what ifs that are so hard to predict. You know, our crystal balls are all down. But if you can think about contingencies, what if this person's not available? What if this person's not alive? What do
There's also a misperception generally. You know, I have a very I'm going to say I have a very old backlist. You know, the woman I worked for was an agent from the 1950s, and you know, look at when Trouble in Mind was originally written, and that play made no money until it was produced on Broadway. There were some regional productions, but it was basically negligible. So there was a misperception about the value of that play. And, you know, just as if you had a diamond necklace and you were thinking about what would happen to that diamond necklace when you died. Now, some people don't care. They're like, I'm dead, I don't care, right? But there are other people who say, you know, which one of my children? What is there a charitable organization? You know, they ask those questions about what should happen with their assets.
Right.
But plays are not always, and in my experience, sort of rarely considered assets. And they really should be, because nobody knows what the future holds. And as for lawyers, I mean, it's just one of those considerations is that your customary wills and estates lawyer, in my experience, doesn't know anything about copyright and the value of copyrighted work and what the parameters are for exploitation in the world. So,
and can you talk a little bit more about you said that there are certain limitations on what an agent can do in certain situations. And I think that for a lot of us, we think, well, we have representations, maybe they'll take care of it. Can you talk about what those limitations are so that we're just really clear on it?
Sure. In a first-class contract and some other contracts, maybe regional, the person signing the contract is asked to represent and warrant that they have the right to enter into the contract, and that's a legal position, that you have the right to sign something and dispose of those rights. You're speaking on behalf of the title, and you're saying, I'm going to stand by this, that, you know, next year when this is produced, there's not going to be someone who pops up out of the woodwork and says, where are my royalties? I'm supposed to get royalties from that play. Right. So they represent and warrant, they can enter into a contract that there's nothing that conflicts with it, and that they are able to transfer, if you will, grant those rights to the party who's going to exploit those rights. So there are minor licenses where I can just say, you're going to produce this play in a school group and you're going to do 10 performances and you're going to pay $500 and thank you very much. But for a first-class production, you need someone to stand behind the property legally. And
Mm.
and unless that's legally conferred upon an agent through power of attorney,
Mhm.
the agent doesn't have that ability.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mm.
So if I could just piggyback on what you said, Sarah, that the expectation of what would be needed to ensure that her works could go forward, that they could be produced, etc., that expectation was not necessarily there just because of how authors and the world of plays and so on are valued, that it's not looked at as an asset necessarily. And going back to the 90s and, you know, the era that she came up with,
Mhm.
that you just don't have that lens. You're just not seeing it the way I just stated it. The what ifs, you know, I'm thinking about things a little differently than her generation did too. Not that I expect anything grand to happen once I leave here, but it's just a point of view.
But it is interesting, and I will say some things I know and they come true, and some things I know and they don't come true.
Mhm.
But I did know that if we got Trouble in Mind produced, and I want to thank Todd Hames for that, and I want to thank Todd Hames because in addition to getting the play produced on Broadway, 2 weeks after we signed you signed the contract, I was contacted by Nicholas Heitner from the National Theatre in London saying, are the rights available?
Mm.
And Roundabout acquires the UK rights, the West End rights for their work when they produce, and have the option after they produce on Broadway to bring something to London. Even though I don't even know if in Roundabout's history that's ever happened.
Mhm.
It hasn't happened.
Mhm.
I called Todd and I said, the play has an opportunity. Please help me make this opportunity available for the play. Would you waive your rights for London? And he said, absolutely. He did,
Oh, wow.
allowing us to have the production open on Broadway and then a month later open in London. So that was extraordinary, and his ability to be to deal with the situation for what it is, not to turn a blind eye to what a play's place in time and space is,
Mhm.
because they are living things.
That's right. That brings me to my next question. Given now that Trouble in Mind has had such a successful run on Broadway and has had so many more productions, had, like you said, regional productions prior, but now I think people are understanding the impact of Alice Childress's work. Given that there are multiple productions that are happening here and there, have you encountered anyone who has wanted to adjust the work for their audiences?
Well, that would be very touchy, especially for any playwright. We know that playwrights maintain their creative control. For a play that was not produced on Broadway, the history behind Trouble in Mind was that it was optioned for Broadway,
Mhm.
and that Alice was asked to rewrite and reached a breaking point as an author where she said, I'm not willing to do that. This
That's
is, this is the play that I want to have produced. And if you can't or won't produce it that way, I'll forego the production. And also when stock and amateur licensing agencies sub-license the play, which Concord is the publisher for the play, in their licenses, they say you can't make any changes. Now, interestingly enough, with Wedding Band, we had a circumstance with the Theater for a New Audience production where we were asked, Suzanne and I were asked about a couple of changes, which in the light of 2022 or 21, when it was produced,
21.
there was a feeling that there were two things that needed something more, something else.
Mhm.
And that's sometimes the case because plays are living things. Sometimes there are things that are, for instance, inappropriate use of language, any number of things.
Mhm.
And I was asked if the estate would agree to cut some language.
Hmm.
And this was an example of where I was so grateful to have a family member to speak with, and a family member who studied the play,
Mhm.
who read the play, who didn't just expect to go to opening night and a party. You know, this was Suzanne knew the play, and when the question came up, she took the play out and looked at it, and looked at specifically what the context of the question,
Mhm.
and was able to come. Now, we would have liked, in a way, you don't want confrontation. You want to facilitate what the creators, and in the sense the creators of the production, are doing. But we discussed it. Suzanne and I discussed it, and felt that Alice's intention in the context of that play would be diminished if we allowed those changes.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's not a judgment call. I mean, again, it was comforting to be able to have that judgment call informed. I'm going to say was important to me, especially that I, as a white person, didn't make a judgment call on something that was specifically addressed as being racist.
Right.
That's why there was a desire to take out in a play about racism. I mean, it's sort of interesting, but right, Suzanne? I mean, wasn't that, it was fascinating.
It
And
really, yeah. The era that Alice wrote about and the kinds of language, it was a child's game that I'm thinking about now, and what the children were singing, and how that was deemed and it might be inappropriate for today's audiences. But Alice's works were also a history lesson.
Mhm.
So if you soften the language, then you're taking away the lesson. And so people won't get, this is what people really said. This is what people really thought. And so if you take that out, you're taking out part of the lesson, because then the play goes on to, and I don't want to get too deeply into the main characters, but how racism affects everybody. And that was a giant lesson. I
Mhm.
came away from the play saying, oh my goodness,
Oh yeah.
what she was saying. So that had to be there. The whole picture had to be there.
Mhm. So do you see your role as sort of preserving the work as opposed to trying to shape it into something that a more modern audience, so to speak, can understand? Now, her work was so progressive and like so ahead of its time, like you were saying, that it seems like we're still playing catch up to it.
Right.
So I wonder, what's the balance between that when you look at the work as a whole? Are there, do you think that there will ever be a moment where you might see a change? And if so, how then would you go about doing that? Is there someone you trust to make that change, or do you trust the people inside of the room to do that? How
I think
would you?
that's such a hard judgment call hypothetically,
Yeah.
because it is conceivable that something that we are not aware of
Mhm.
within the context of time and space and humanity might warrant revision. But on a certain level, representation of Alice Childress's work is rather easy,
Mhm.
because she was an activist
That's right.
and she stood behind her word. There's real life history of her standing behind her word.
Yeah.
So I think it empowers a little bit more than you might, there are playwrights who are asked about changes and they go, "I'll let them do whatever they want to do."
Yeah.
That's a different kind of situation. That's
Yeah.
not how Alice was.
Absolutely. She fought so hard for every letter on the page.
Exactly.
It seems almost inconceivable to
Yeah.
Change it.
acquire with it.
Only
Yeah.
thing to attempt to answer your question,
Mhm.
and I'm not a playwright by any stretch of the imagination, but I could see her play, a scene, intact, juxtaposed to an interpretation of a similar scene, a different play with today's language, so that people have something to
Oh,
compare and
and
contrast.
one more thing that we've discussed sort of preliminarily. So
Mhm.
there are works of Alice's that really did not have the benefit of full development or production, if you will.
Yeah.
Like Gold Through the Trees is one of her works, which the material that we have is again, I would say, not fully developed.
Mhm.
And Suzanne and I have talked about, is there an artist who we would, the question that you asked, is there an
Yeah.
artist who we would empower, who would have the connection with the material, with Alice, with what Alice was about, and be able to perhaps sort of play that doctor's role, if you will,
Mhm.
in bringing the piece into full realization? And that's something we're exploring.
Wow. Wow.
Mhm.
That's a really huge and complicated sort of decision to make. And it's good. And what I'm feeling and hearing from you, that this marriage between representation and the family is so important to
Mhm.
have both sides of the coin, to have these really tough conversations to move the work forward.
Yes.
Do you feel as though, I know personally, like I said, I studied Alice's work in undergrad and was floored that more people didn't know her work and were not connected to it in the way that I was like, how can you not? She was like the first African American woman to be produced off Broadway. Like there's so many firsts in her advocacy and all of these things. It was astounding to me that more people didn't know the work. So this is sort of a, I don't know. I don't know if this question is neither here nor there right now, but because of the work that you all did, how do you see her legacy being received now as say 10, 15 years ago even? How are people receiving it?
I think that, I mean, I'm just going to say, I think that there's a lens of systemic racism that Alice's story, if you will, as a playwright illuminates.
Mm-hmm. I think that when I'm looking at two things, seeing Trouble in Mind on Broadway for a New York audience, and then seeing it in London with a British audience, where there was a lot more laughter and humor. The story wasn't different, but culturally, it presents differently. And so the response you get from the audience is different. I wasn't expecting all of this laughter, whereas we were more subdued, more solemn, seemingly more thoughtful about what we were seeing. And maybe because, too, it's American history as opposed to British history. Just like there was a piece about Hamilton and how it didn't play well in Germany because their culture doesn't understand American history, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
So yeah, and I've kind of forgotten the beginning
Yeah.
of the
No, but
question.
do you see a deeper engagement with her work now?
That's happening.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is happening. And I
Mhm.
think that the more her work is presented, the more engagement there will be, especially, well, younger and older audiences. I had a conversation with a young woman who said that she took her mother to see it. Her mother really enjoyed it. She thought it was old. And this is
Mm,
not coming from someone in her 20s, but someone in her 40s, I think.
mhm.
So, generationally, people expect something different. They expect the language to be different. They don't expect a 1950s presentation because they weren't, they were maybe babies or they weren't born yet. And so I think people have to be exposed and they need to be educated, and it just
Mhm.
has to keep coming and keep coming. And more authors have to speak to those same issues. I think those same issues need to keep being presented in new ways, and then, so that Alice's message does not get lost or
Absolutely.
minimized.
Absolutely. Can I ask you now what the structure of maintaining the estate is right now? Like, and what is the future of that preservation? How is it being manned? And how will it be manned in the
The future is
next
in
few
question
years? Mm-hmm.
because we have relatively recently, the estate was sort of the legal mechanism of settling the estate was completed.
Mhm.
And the beneficiaries were all identified, because the Reverend died without a will. There was a chain of inheritance, if you will, that had to be uncovered through the extensive legal work that Suzanne was responsible for engaging a lawyer for.
Mm.
And so there was, on the one hand, a very practical issue, which was that I cannot have to speak to 6 different people to make decisions that need the I still refer to it as the estate, although now it's the beneficiaries, right? That's not that's crazy, right? Can't field 6 different people's questions and issues, but as something that can rest with the family. So we created a mechanism for the family to have their voice. The beneficiaries these beneficiaries tend to, there's one family member who's interested in learning more, but none of them are in New York. It puts them at a disadvantage for really knowing what's going on in theater. It's good to know if you're asked for approval of a director. It's nice to be in a position where you can at least meet them.
Yeah.
Maybe you've seen their work if you're in New York. Suzanne got to meet Charles Randolph Wright years before he really took on the direction. She saw what he did with the reading. She was able to meet the cast. She was able to familiarize herself in the process of having it cast with what the roles were and the actors that were considered, and weigh and balance those. So Suzanne still remains sort of the let me say, the creative linchpin for the work, for me, the work with Alice's catalog.
Okay. Okay.
And
What would
also,
you?
Suzanne, about going to Charleston for
Mhm.
the Alice Childress Symposium, here's an example where a theater in Charleston has voiced interest in making their entire season about Alice's work.
Well, which
And
theater
they'll
company is that?
produce- I have to, it's actually an amateur theater company, but they will do 6 of Alice's plays.
That's wonderful.
They will do 2 of the children's plays that are never. Alice also wrote plays for children,
Yeah.
which I mean, I've never seen productions of these things.
Yeah.
And Suzanne takes the time and has the interest. She's going to go down and see the theater and talk with the people at the theater while they're doing their August Wilson Symposium.
Right.
I mean, first of all, what a wonderful company for Alice to be in.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Right. But also we have the partnership where Suzanne will go and be informed, and they will inform her.
Mhm.
So you have a hands-on involvement that there's no substitute for that. And I will look up the name of the theater because I should not do them such a disservice.
No,
Thank
no,
you.
no. I would love to, because I'm
Yeah.
down here now, and I'd love to go see it. I'd love to go see it. What do you think the greatest lessons you've learned through this entire process has been, from the beginning to the end? What do you think the rest of us can learn as dramatists about how to preserve legacy, what to prepare your family for? What do you think?
Suzanne, I'd love to hear your answer.
Yeah.
Okay. What is it? Ask yourself this question as the author. What is it that you want people to know?
Mm.
And you may have many things that you want them to know. Every time you write a new work, something else, you're teaching a new lesson, and you are teaching. So what's your point of view? What is the core of what you want people to get? How do you want society to benefit from what you are presenting to them? Because through this process, and just listening and talking with actors and directors and so on, everyone is so concerned that they're getting their message across. You know, not just that their name is going to be up in lights, their play is going to be on Broadway or wherever. Of course, those are real and positive goals. You know, everybody wants to be successful. But there's a drive that makes you do what you do, write what you write, say what you have to say. What is it you want people to know? And then you've got to let someone know in your family, professional people like a lawyer, minister, whomever. Make sure that they know that this is your mission and that can be carried out. You won't have any control after you're not here anymore, but this is your goal.
Absolutely.
They know what the goal is.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would add, and take care of business.
Mm-hmm.
Break
Don't
that down for us.
diminish the value of what you have put your time, attention, and
Yeah.
talent into, even if you can't translate it at the moment that you are making your will into something that has a dollar value. If for no other reason than you put your time, talent, and into something, recognize it as something valuable.
Mm, that is so powerful. I was talking with my family about that. I think just a few days ago. I'm like, this is what I want people to understand about. This is how I'm trying to break through inside of this industry where there's such maybe a narrower view of maybe Southern storytelling. And I want to break through this way, you know. And so just trying to explain to the people closest to you what it is you care about as far as like your words and worth, and say, can you be a great caretaker of these words and worth for me? I think it's a really powerful conversation to have, and an
I
important
think so too.
conversation to have.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Um,
So I have to apologize to everybody for my ignorance. It's the Charlottesville Guild Players Theater, which is doing the entire season 24-25 about Alice Childress in Charlottesville.
Charlottesville. Okay,
Yeah.
very good, very good. Shout out to the Charlottesville Guild Players.
Yes.
Shout out to them. I think it's a wonderful thing when someone's work can be held that deeply, especially in one place.
It's
so you can examine
extraordinary.
it.
Yes.
It's really it's a big deal. And so shout out to them for doing that. That's fantastic.
It's going to be held at the Jefferson School in Charlottesville.
Oh, fantastic. That is absolutely fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll ask you this. This is a big broad question, and I know how I would answer it, but how do you hope that Alice's work would be remembered? How do you hope that she would be remembered?
As a pioneer, a woman who was not afraid to say what was on her mind and not afraid to try to teach the lessons of American history and racism to the world, basically. And that it's not just a them versus us situation, but it affects everyone. Yeah.
Sarah, do you have thoughts?
I completely echo and support what Suzanne said. I don't think that's anything I could add.
Fantastic. Let's see if we have some questions here. Yes, okay. Let's see what we have here. Okay. We have one question here, Susan, regarding the London production that got the laughs. Were the actors using British or American accents primarily?
They were using American accents. Yeah.
Okay, and you were saying that just felt like there was a historical, cultural difference in how they received the play. Yeah.
Yeah, just based on British culture. I don't think that they thought, well, I'm trying to speak for people who I'm not British, so it's pretty hard for me to say what I was trying to say. But it's just, I think humor is different in different societies. You know, that's the best I can really say about that. I mean,
Yeah.
hear how we respond to a story, we would probably not laugh out loud about something that they might laugh out loud. That doesn't necessarily mean they thought it was humorous, but maybe just the language of it, or the way the actors conducted themselves on stage physically. You know, they may have found humor in that. I didn't get to talk to any audience members, so, you know, this is just what I observed, and I'm just trying to come up with a reason for it.
Fair enough. That's fair enough. Sarah, any thoughts about that? Did you?
It was such a peculiar experience. I mean, they were like, I mean, I'm talking about from the set to the costumes to the, it was a very different world from an American reality and perspective, let me say. And it wasn't, I think the director was sensitive to director who was American, right?
Yes.
An American living in London, was sensitive, not insensitive to the racial relationships that are told there, but there was something, it was like the filter that the play went through didn't come to the same place. It was.
It's kind of hard to describe. You had to actually see it.
Sure.
I understand.
It was very, it was really, I mean, I think that how cultural difference really inform the fiber of things is fascinating.
We have a question about the unpublished work. Is there intention to publish the work? If there is unpublished work.
I don't, the things that are unpublished for a reason. So I don't think, I mean, Go Through the Trees is published, for instance, if that's what the reference is.
Right.
So I right now I'm not aware of anything that is unpublished that we would publish.
Okay, that's fair. But you are also considering possibly a reading or experimenting with the development of that work in some way, shape, or form?
Let's say an undeveloped work as opposed to unfinished, right?
Gotcha.
Is there an artist's eye that can be brought to certain works of Alice's? We are going to approach that on a case by case, artist by artist situation.
Gotcha. Fantastic. We have some expressions of gratitude that this has been wonderful, and thank you, and thank you, and thank you. And I do thank you as well.